All right, let's jump into another deep dive. And this time we're tackling a film that pretty much ripped up the rule book on how to tell a story.
You're talking about Pulp Fiction, right?
You got it. The one that took home the Palme d'Or at Cannes.
And snagged an Oscar for Best Original Screenplay.
Exactly. So we're not going to just rehash the plot. I think it's safe to say, everyone listening's probably seen it at least once, right?
At least.
So instead, we're going to try to figure out what makes Pulp Fiction tick, how it messes with what we expect to see, and why it still feels so fresh even today.
Sound like a plan.
So the first thing that always kind of throws me off is how time works in the movie.
Yeah, how so?
It doesn't just flow in a straight line, It jumps around, overlaps. Sometimes it almost feels like it's going backward.
Yeah, I see what you mean.
So is that like a stylistic choice by Tarantino, or is there something more going on, you think?
Oh, it's definitely more than just style. See, by scrambling the timeline, Tarantino's actually making us, the audience, work harder to follow the story.
Makes sense.
We gotta piece things together ourselves, make connections, even question what we think is cause and effect.
Yeah.
What came first?
So it's not just a gimmick. It actually makes the viewing experience better.
Exactly. Think about how we first meet Vincent Vega, for example.
Yeah, okay.
We see him with Jules, right? And it's clear they're already hitmen. They've been doing this. But then, later on, we see Vincent's whole day.
Right.
Leading up to, his unfortunate end.
Mm-hmm.
And that nonlinear structure, it adds these layers to his character. It's weird. We get this feeling of knowing him, but also being surprised by him all at the same time.
True. We're seeing him like forward and backward in time almost.
Yeah.
Adds to that unpredictability that's all over the movie.
Exactly. And it plays with our expectations, too. By the time we actually see Vincent's death scene,
right,
we've already spent time with him, understand his anxieties and stuff. It gives the scene so much more weight than if the timeline was straightforward.
Yeah, definitely. It makes his death more impactful, but also like more ironic because we already know what led up to it, right? Almost like, what's that term? Dramatic irony, but on a movie-wide scale.
You nailed it. Tarantino uses the messed up timeline not just to tell a story, but to play with our emotions, our expectations of what's coming next.
Right. Okay, let's talk about the story itself for a sec. Because Pulp Fiction isn't just one single narrative, right? It's like all these little stories, these vignettes. You've got Vincent and Jules doing their hits. Then you've got Vincent's crazy night out with Mia, Butch Coolidge in that boxing match gone wrong, and the diner robbery that kind of bookends the whole thing. How do all these pieces that seem separate actually work together?
That's where you really see Tarantino's genius as a writer.
Oh, yeah?
These stories aren't just side by side. They're like subtly woven together. Characters bump into each other. Things that happen have consequences you don't see right away. And tiny details end up mattering a lot later on.
It's like he's built this tapestry, of these interconnected lives. Every little thread, no matter how small, it adds to the bigger picture.
Precisely. Then the more times you watch Pulp Fiction, the more you pick up on those connections. It's wild. The world of the film feels so real, even though it's over the top and violent.
For sure.
It's kind of like, have you ever had those moments in your own life? You suddenly realize how some random encounter or choice you made led you to where you are now.
Yeah, totally. Makes you think about all those little coincidences, the connections that kind of bring us to where we are, right?
Exactly. And Pulp Fiction captures that feeling perfectly. And it's not just about the plot either. The way Tarantino weaves these stories together makes you feel uncertain, adds to the suspense,
Keeps you guessing.
Yeah, we're always wondering how these different threads are going to connect, what's going to happen because of what we just saw.
Yeah.
How it's all going to end.
Keeps you on the edge of your seat. But I think that's also what makes Pulp Fiction so rewatchable.
Yeah.
Every time you see it, you notice something new, like a new connection or a new layer of meaning.
Totally.
And the way those separate stories are actually part of a bigger, more intricate narrative, right?
Exactly. It shows how skilled Tarantino is as a storyteller. He's not just telling us a story, he's inviting us to be part of the storytelling ourselves.
I like that.
He gives us the puzzle pieces, trusts us to put them together, find our own meaning and all the, the chaos.
And that's something we see even more when we look at how he uses dialogue, right?
For sure.
It's not just about moving the plot forward. It's about creating those characters, showing us their relationships, and exploring, bigger ideas and themes. Like, remember that Royale with cheese scene?
Of course. Classic.
Such a small conversation. Seemingly meaningless.
Yeah.
But it tells you so much about Vincent and Jules, about who they are, how they see the world. Even hints at, like, cultural differences within the criminal world, And it's hilarious. Who knew talking about burgers could be so entertaining and also insightful?
That's the Tarantino magic. He takes what's ordinary, elevates it, makes us laugh, think, and even question things about the world around us, all through these everyday conversations.
Like he's saying that even the most normal moments can be full of meaning, right?
Yeah.
If we just pay attention. It's like when you have a deep talk with a friend about something totally random. You end up feeling like you learned something profound,
Exactly. It shows how powerful Tarantino's dialogue is. It's not just clever or funny, it's insightful. It makes you pay attention to the details, the nuances, the little things we often miss in our own lives.
And it's all delivered with this incredible energy and style. The way the characters talk, the slang, all the pop culture references. It's iconic. Everybody quotes Pulp Fiction.
Absolutely. It's not just the words themselves, it's the rhythm, the pacing. How Tarantino uses pauses, interruptions, even people talking over each other. It feels so real, so immediate.
It's like we're right there, eavesdropping on a real conversation, even though we know it's a movie, right?
Exactly. And that's a credit to the actors, too. They bring these characters to life with such conviction. It's hard not to get pulled into their world.
Yeah.
It all goes back to Tarantino's vision, though, and his skill at writing dialogue that's both entertaining and meaningful. He gets the power of words, uses them to create these vivid characters, build the tension, and explore complex themes.
Now, speaking of Tarantino's vision, another thing that strikes me about Pulp Fiction is that it doesn't fit neatly into any one genre, right? It's a crime drama, a black comedy, a gangster flick, even has some Western vibes thrown in there.
You've got that right.
How does mixing all these genres actually add to the impact of the film?
Well, by blending them together, Tarantino makes the movie feel unpredictable, keeps us guessing. We never quite know what's going to happen next, and that keeps us hooked.
It's like he took all these familiar elements and scrambled them up to create something totally new.
Right. And it lets him explore different themes and tones within the same film. Like the humor in Pulp Fiction, it's often dark and ironic, which adds a whole other layer to the violence and the suspense.
Good point. The humor is not just there for laughs. It often makes the tension even stronger, or comments on how absurd the situations are,
Exactly. And by drawing from all these genres, Tarantino created this unique cinematic language. It feels both familiar and fresh at the same time.
It's like he's paying tribute to the things he loves, but also forging his own path.
Right.
It's a movie that wears its influences on its sleeve.
Yeah.
But it never feels like a copycat or unoriginal. And I think that's because Tarantino's so good at taking those influences and turning them into something that's uniquely his.
Absolutely. And that's part of what makes Pulp Fiction so influential. It gave other filmmakers the courage to try new things, break the rules, borrow from different genres, find their own voices.
It's like he opened up a whole new world of possibilities for storytelling and film. And you can see his influence in so many movies and shows that came after.
Without a doubt. And it's not just about the genre bending itself, it's about how Tarantino uses genre to make a point, to say something. For example, those Western elements in the Butch and Marcellus story.
Right.
They add this mythical, almost legendary feel to their conflict. They highlight themes of masculinity, power, and revenge.
And by putting those different genres side by side, he also creates this sense of contrast and irony, which adds to the overall impact of the film, right? It's like he's always playing with what we expect, turning things upside down and making us see things in a new light.
That's a great observation. It shows Tarantino's skill as a filmmaker. He's not just entertaining us, he's making us think about the rules of movies, the nature of storytelling, and how different genres can be used to create meaning.
Okay, we've talked about structure, dialogue, mixing genres, and even themes in Pulp Fiction. But what about the heart of it all? The characters. What a memorable bunch, right?
Oh, definitely. Each one's so distinct, complex, and surprisingly relatable, even when they're doing awful things.
Let's start with Vincent Vega, played by John Travolta. He's a hitman, a drug addict, someone who can be both charming and scary at the same time.
He's fascinating because he embodies all those contradictions in the film. He's violent, but also capable of compassion. He's philosophical, but often clueless. And he seems to be searching for something deeper, even though he lives this life of crime.
He's a total paradox.
Yeah.
And I think his journey throughout the movie is one of those interesting parts. He starts off as this cool, confident hitman. But as we go along, you start to see the cracks,
Yeah.
He's haunted by his past. He's fighting addiction. And he's searching for some kind of redemption, even if he doesn't realize it.
That's a great way to put it. And his relationship with Jules, his partner, is what really makes his character come alive.
For sure. Their conversations are some of the best in the movie. They talk about everything. Burgers, the Bible. Their back and forth tells you so much about their personalities, what they believe, and how their relationship changes as the film goes on.
And that's a testament to the chemistry between John Travolta and Samuel L. Jackson. They bring so much energy and charisma to those roles. You can't help but get drawn into their story.
And Jules Winfield.
Yeah.
Played by Samuel L. Jackson, of course. He's a hitman who goes through this spiritual transformation over the course of the film. Do you think that transformation is real, or is it just a brief moment of, like, enlightenment in a life full of violence?
That's one of the big questions the film asks us to wrestle with. Is it even possible for someone who's done such terrible things to find redemption?
It's a tough question. But Jules' journey makes us consider the possibility of change, even in the darkest situations. And I think that's what makes his character so compelling. He's not just a bad guy or a good guy. He's a complex person trying to find his place in a world that often seems meaningless, you know?
And his famous Ezekiel 25.17 speech is a perfect example of that complexity. It's this powerful moment of righteous anger, but there's also a sense of uncertainty, of self-doubt. Like he's trying to convince himself as much as he's trying to intimidate those guys.
It's definitely a scene that sticks with you, and it's a great example of how Tarantino uses dialogue to show us who these characters really are and to explore those deeper themes we talked about.
Right. And we can't forget about the amazing women in Pulp Fiction. Mia Wallace, played by Uma Thurman, she's got to be one of the most iconic female characters in movie history.
She's a force of nature, beautiful, dangerous, and you never know what she's going to do next.
And she's the perfect opposite to Vincent. She challenges him, tempts him, and in the end makes him face his own mortality and the consequences of his choices.
Their night out together is one of the most suspenseful, darkly funny parts of the movie. Drugs, music, dancing, almost dying.
Yeah.
It's a roller coaster.
And it's a masterclass in how Tarantino builds tension, then releases it. We're always on edge, wondering what'll happen next. And just when we think we've got it figured out, he throws a curveball.
It's a wild ride, and Mia Wallace is the perfect guide through that dangerous and exciting world.
And then there's Butch Coolidge, played by Bruce Willis, a boxer on the run from a mob boss. His story's about survival, loyalty, and unexpected heroism.
He's a classic anti-hero.
Yeah.
Tough, resourceful, doesn't mind getting his hands dirty, but he's also capable of compassion, of loyalty, even when it puts him in danger.
And his relationship with his girlfriend, Fabienne, played by Maria de Medeiros, is one of the most tender and heartwarming parts of the film.
It reminds you that even amidst all that chaos and violence, there's still space for love and connection.
And Butch's journey is ultimately one of redemption, right?
Yeah.
He makes some bad calls, but in the end, he chooses to do the right thing, even if it means risking his own neck.
It's like the classic hero's journey, but with a Tarantino twist.
Exactly. It's a reminder that even the most flawed characters can find redemption, even if it comes at a price.
And even the smaller characters in Pulp Fiction are so memorable. Marcellus Wallace, Pumpkin, Honey Bunny, Captain Coons, they all add to this rich tapestry of characters and stories.
Absolutely. Even the smallest roles feel important, fully fleshed out, like we're just getting a glimpse into this much larger world, a world where everyone has a story, and where even everyday people can get caught up in crazy situations.
And it's that feeling of a larger world, a world beyond the main storylines, that makes Pulp Fiction so captivating. It invites us to explore its many layers, to connect the dots, and to find our own meaning in its world, which on the surface seems so chaotic.
I agree. It's a film that really makes you think. Like, Tarantino created this whole world, you know?
Yeah.
Where even a short scene with a character like Captain Coons telling that wild story about a gold watch,
Right.
it adds to the overall feeling of the film and what it's trying to say.
It's true. That story about the watch.
Yeah.
It could almost be its own little Pulp Fiction movie, you know?
Totally could.
And it makes you think about all the stories these characters are carrying around with them, their experiences, even if we only see a tiny bit of it.
Exactly. It emphasizes that every character, no matter how small their part is, has a past and a future that goes beyond what we see in the film.
And that's one of the things that makes Pulp Fiction so rewatchable, I think. You can always pick up something new, some little detail you missed before,
Right.
or some connection that gives you a whole other layer of meaning.
It's a film that really rewards you if you pay attention. That's part of what sets it apart from a lot of other movies. It's not just about sitting back and being entertained.
It's about actively engaging with it.
Right.
And I think that's why it hit such a nerve with audiences when it first came out, and why it still feels so relevant today.
Yeah, definitely.
It's a film that respects the audience's intelligence. doesn't spell everything out for you.
It makes you think for yourself.
Yeah. It challenges you to put the pieces together and come to your own conclusions.
And I think it also reflects something bigger that was happening in the 90s, you know? Audiences were becoming more savvy,
Yeah.
more open to stories that challenged them a bit, and more willing to engage with films that really demanded their attention.
And Pulp Fiction fit that perfectly.
Absolutely. It was bold, it was innovative, it didn't care about playing by the rules.
And it had this incredible style that was both cool and kind of subversive.
Yeah.
The music, the costumes, the way it's shot, it all added to this feeling that Pulp Fiction was something different, special. You know, it's funny. We've talked about all these different parts of Pulp Fiction, the structure, the dialogue, the characters, the themes, but it all flows together so well to make this really unforgettable movie experience.
And I think a lot of that has to do with Tarantino's use of music.
Oh, yeah.
He's a master at creating soundtracks that are so diverse and perfectly matched to the mood and feel of his films.
Absolutely. The music in Pulp Fiction is like another character in the movie.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. It's driving the story, setting the mood, adding these layers of meaning to every scene.
Think about that opening scene with Dick Dale's Mr. Lou, for example. It's this burst of surf rock energy that immediately tells you what kind of movie you're in for.
Yeah. Yeah.
Cool, stylish, and a little bit dangerous.
It's impossible not to tap your foot along to that song. And it captures that feeling of those early scenes so perfectly.
Yeah.
With Vincent and Jules cruising around L.A. in their sharp suits and sunglasses.
And then just a few scenes later, you have that incredibly tense moment where Vincent accidentally shoots Marvin in the face. And the music completely changes. It becomes this eerie, almost silent soundscape that makes the shock and horror of that moment even stronger.
It's like the music is reflecting what the characters are feeling inside, you know?
Yeah.
Their inner turmoil and that sudden shift from joking around to this shocking violence.
And Tarantino's use of music isn't just about creating a mood or setting the atmosphere. It's also about creating this ironic counterpoint. Remember the scene where Mia overdoses on heroin? And the music playing in the background is that upbeat cover of Girl, You'll Be a Woman Soon by Urge Overkill.
Oh, yeah, that's wild. It's such a crazy mix. You've got this super dark, suspenseful scene and then this almost cheerful pop song playing on the soundtrack.
It gives you this really unsettling feeling like something is terribly wrong, even though the music is telling you something completely different.
Right.
And that's classic Tarantino. He loves using music to mess with our expectations and create these deeper layers of meaning that go beyond what's happening on screen.
It's like he's playing with our emotions, making us laugh 1 minute and then hitting us with something shocking the next.
Yeah.
And the music is a big part of how he does that.
It's such a brilliant technique. And it shows how deeply he understands how music can be used to tell a story. It can shape our emotional response and create a world that feels both familiar and strange.
Okay, I gotta ask, what's your favorite scene in Pulp Fiction? There are so many iconic moments to choose from.
Oh man, that's a tough one. So many great scenes. But I think I'd have to go with that adrenaline shot scene. It's so well done. The tension builds so slowly as Vincent is frantically searching for the adrenaline and the needle. And then there's that moment of pure chaos when he jams the needle into Mia's chest. The music swells, and it's just pure cinematic adrenaline.
That scene is definitely burned into my memory. It's a perfect example of how Tarantino can take something that seems simple and turn it into a heart-pounding thrill ride.
And it's not just about the action itself. It's about how the scene shows us the characters' weaknesses, their desperation, and their unexpected capacity for compassion. Even in that moment of extreme stress, Vincent is trying to save Mia. And Jules is trying to keep some kind of control in the middle of all the chaos.
It reminds us that even these hardened criminals are still human. They can feel fear and empathy, and even be heroic in a way.
And it's a turning point for Jules, too. That experience, combined with the miracle he saw earlier in the film, leads him to start questioning his life and to look for a different way to live.
Oh yeah, it is a turning point, isn't it? That scene is huge for both characters. It makes them confront their own mortality, you know, and think about the choices they've made. And it sends them on very different paths.
And that leads us to one of the things that makes Pulp Fiction so interesting to break down, the way it plays with ideas of fate, free will, and redemption.
It's like the movie's asking us to decide if our lives are already planned out or if we have the power to change our destiny.
Right.
And it doesn't give us any easy answers.
Exactly. There are times in the film when it seems like fate is calling the shots, like with that miracle in the apartment or how Butch keeps running into Marcellus. But then you have other moments where the characters make choices that seem to go against fate, like Jules deciding to walk away from his life of crime, or Butch choosing to save Marcellus in the pawn shop.
It's like Tarantino's saying that both fate and free will are at work in our lives, right? And it's up to us to decide how we deal with the challenges and the opportunities that come our way.
And that's something a lot of people can relate to. We all wonder about our place in the world, whether our lives have a purpose. Do we have the power to create our own destiny?
For sure.
And Pulp Fiction doesn't shy away from those questions. It presents them in a way that's both entertaining and makes you think.
It doesn't tell you what to think, it makes you think.
Yeah.
And that's a rare thing to find these days.
Totally agree.
Now, we can't talk about Pulp Fiction without mentioning, the elephant in the room. The violence.
Right.
It's a film that's both stylized and shocking in how it portrays violence.
And that's definitely something people have debated for years. Some argue that Tarantino glorifies violence, while others see it as a necessary element of his storytelling.
Right.
A way to explore the darker side of society and the consequences of our actions.
It's definitely not a film for everyone. But I think it's important to remember that Tarantino's violence always has a purpose. It's not just there to be shocking. It's not gratuitous. It's there to make a point, to get a reaction from the audience, and to force us to think about how we view violence in art and in real life.
And it's often presented with this dark humor that makes our reaction even more complicated. We might laugh at how ridiculous a situation is, but then feel uncomfortable or even guilty for finding humor in such a dark moment.
It's like he's playing with our emotions, making us question our own sense of right and wrong, and forcing us to think about the line between entertainment and exploitation.
And I think that's part of what makes Pulp Fiction so challenging and rewarding. It doesn't give you easy answers. It makes you think for yourself, grapple with some uncomfortable truths, and confront your own hypocrisy.
It's a film that has had a lasting impact on movies, too. You can see its influence all over the place.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
It's true. Pulp Fiction broke all the rules, and it opened the door for a whole new generation of filmmakers to experiment with different ways of telling stories, mixing genres, and creating movies that were both smart and entertaining.
And it showed that independent film could be both critically acclaimed and make a ton of money.
It was a huge risk for Tarantino to make a film like Pulp Fiction, but it definitely paid off.
It definitely did. And it gave other filmmakers the freedom to experiment, to push the boundaries, and to create something truly unique.
And that's a pretty impressive legacy.
It's a testament to how original and powerful Pulp Fiction really is.
Now, before we finish up this part of our deep dive, I want to go back to something we talked about earlier. Tarantino's love of film history. It's all over Pulp Fiction, from the tons of references to other films to how he uses these classic filmmaking techniques.
It's like he's having this conversation with film history.
Yeah.
Paying tribute to the things that influenced him while also taking them apart and turning them on their head.
It's a movie that's both self-aware and really respectful of its cinematic roots.
And that's what makes it so interesting. It's like Tarantino's inviting us to explore film history with him, to see the connections and inspirations that have shaped his work.
It's like a treasure hunt for film lovers.
Exactly. And that's another reason why Pulp Fiction is so rewatchable. You can always find something new, a reference you missed before, a subtle nod to a classic movie.
And it reminds us that great art is often built on what came before it, right?
It's a dialogue that spans time and space.
Yeah.
A conversation between artists and audiences that goes beyond generations.
And Pulp Fiction is a perfect example of that dialogue in action.
Absolutely. It's a film that was a product of its time, but is also a timeless work of art.
Okay, we've covered a lot of ground here. We talked about the structure, the dialogue, the characters, the themes, the music, the violence, the humor, and the impact of Pulp Fiction. Is there anything we missed? Any burning questions we haven't touched on yet?
I think we've hit most of the main points. But I think it's important to remember that Pulp Fiction is, at its core, a film about storytelling itself.
That's a great point.
Yeah, it's a film that celebrates how stories can bring us together, challenge our thinking, and help us understand the world around us.
And it reminds us that the best stories are often the ones that break the rules, that take risks, and that surprise us with how original and bold they are.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a film that encourages us to be storytellers in our own lives, to embrace the unexpected, and to find beauty in the messiness of it all.
And that's a pretty powerful message coming from a movie full of hitmen, gangsters, and drug addicts.
It really is. But somehow, Tarantino makes it all work. He creates a world that's both familiar and strange, horrifying and hilarious, and in the end, deeply human.
And that's why Pulp Fiction still resonates with people today.
Yeah.
Almost 30 years after it came out. It's a film that speaks to our deepest fears, our wildest dreams, and our fascination with the power of stories.
Well said. It encourages us to be a part of the storytelling process ourselves.
Right.
To put the pieces together, fill in the blanks, and decide for ourselves what it all means.
And that's what makes it so endlessly fascinating to talk about and analyze. There's no one right answer, no single way to look at it that captures everything that Pulp Fiction is about.
And that's part of why it's sparked so much debate over the years, right?
Absolutely.
People are still going back and forth about the meaning of that briefcase, what the dance contest was all about, and whether Jules actually makes it out okay in the end.
And those are all great questions. There's no easy answer. That's what makes it so thought-provoking.
Yeah.
It encourages us to engage with the film on all these different levels,
Right.
to think critically and draw our own conclusions.
It doesn't hand you the answers on a silver platter. It pushes you to figure things out for yourself and find meaning in all the chaos.
Right. And I think that's why, ultimately, Pulp Fiction feels so timeless.
I agree.
It's a film that reflects how complicated life is,
Yeah.
how messy our relationships can be, and that struggle we all face to find meaning and purpose in a world that can often feel random and absurd.
And it does all that with style, wit, and a whole lot of cinematic energy.
Oh, absolutely. It's a visually stunning film that also stimulates you intellectually.
It's a treat for your senses and your mind.
Exactly. And it's a reminder that great art can entertain you and make you think deeply, all at the same time.
It can make you laugh, make you cry, make you question everything you thought you knew about the world.
And Pulp Fiction manages to do all of those things.
As we wrap up our deep dive into Pulp Fiction, I want to leave you with one final thought.
Okay.
Pulp Fiction is a film that breaks all the categories. It's a crime drama, a black comedy, a love story, a philosophical discussion, even a love letter to cinema itself.
It's a film that shatters expectations and makes us see the world from a different perspective.
And it reminds us that the most captivating stories are often the ones that don't follow a straight path.
That the most memorable characters are often the ones with flaws, who are complicated, and in the end, very human.
And that even when things seem their darkest, there's always a glimmer of hope, a chance for redemption, and the possibility for change.
That's a perfect way to sum it up.
It's been awesome exploring the world of Pulp Fiction with you. And to everyone listening, we encourage you to go back and watch the film again. Really pay attention to the details. Ask yourselves questions. And find your own meaning in its chaotic and completely engrossing world.
Until next time, keep those deep dives going.